Hey guys, welcome back to the second week of our Follow Me series. And if you'll remember, last week we looked at the story of Mary, Martha, and Jesus as Mary was bowed down at the feet of Christ. And Martha was just so upset because Mary wasn't helping her. But Jesus said, hey, dude, Mary is in the right place. She is where she should be. She is showing respect. She is loving the Father. She is loving Jesus. And so we just want to encourage you guys that I hope this week was an encouraging week and that you went out and made an effort to preach and teach the gospel to people, and that you were sitting at the feet of the Lord, soaking in His word and His praises and who He is, so that you can be better ministers of the gospel. Now this week we're going to transition into Luke chapter 5, verses 27 through 28. And we're going to be looking at Jesus and a tax collector named Levi. And so let's look at what it says in Luke chapter 5, verses 27 through 28. It says this, it says, "After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax office, and he said to him, 'Follow me.' So leaving everything behind, he got up and he began to follow him." Now that is incredible, because when we think about it, every single thing that this tax collector had, every single valuable thing that he had, Jesus said, hey, leave everything you have behind and come and follow me. And Levi did not hesitate 1 minute. He immediately got up and he immediately followed Jesus. Now, if we think about this, we can think about some people in the Bible who didn't do this. We think about the rich young ruler who, when Jesus told him to follow me, he was weary and he was upset because he had so many great possessions and he didn't want to leave his possessions behind to follow Jesus. And we think about even Jonah. We can think about Jonah as he was called to go to Nineveh, yet he said, no, I don't want to do that. And he fled from the Lord. And so we see that Levi was a very, very faithful man. And we're going to learn and look at some questions about what it means to be faithful and to follow Jesus everywhere we go, regardless of what he has for us to do. You know, a lot of us, I think, it would be tough for us to follow him when he told us, hey, leave everything you have behind, leave your family behind, leave all your possessions behind, and come and follow me. That'd be tough for a lot of people. So we can look at people like Levi as an example of what we should do when Jesus calls us to come and follow him. And so let's look at this, the very first couple of questions that we have here. The first one, can you identify the two characters in these verses, who they are, what their purpose is? And then the second one is this, what was Levi's job? Right, well, those are two, I think, pretty easy questions, right? We were able to see that Jesus and Levi were a part here, and then also that Levi, his job was a tax collector, but the most beautiful thing about his story is that he was so faithful, and he was a faithful tax collector. And so we move on, and let's look at the next set of questions that we have here. These are kind of your comprehension questions, your understanding questions. And so here's the first question. Why is it so important to the story that Levi was a tax collector? What do you think? Why was it important that Levi was a tax collector? The second question is this. What command does Jesus give his disciples when he first calls them? So why was it important that Levi was a tax collector? And what is the first command that Jesus gives his disciples once he calls them? What do you guys think? We'll be back here in a couple minutes. Be sure that you guys are discussing both of these questions. Right, so one of the most important things that Jesus has for disciples is something that we have seen already. We see it in Matthew, we see it in the book of Luke right here, and then we even see it throughout the Bible, but especially in the Great Commission, where he says, go and make disciples. And the only way that we can do that is if we are truly following him. And so his commandment is that we would go and we would follow Jesus for whatever he has for us to do. And so as we move into our next group of questions here, these are the application questions. So how do these questions apply to your life? All right, here's the first one. When Jesus calls Levi to follow him, he immediately starts following him. Is Jesus calling you to follow him? And how can we act like Levi? So what is Jesus calling you to do, and how can we act like Levi in doing that? And the second question is this. When Jesus called Levi, he also left his entire livelihood. And being called by Jesus to follow him, what is he asking you to leave behind? So what is important to you that is keeping you from following Jesus? Take a couple minutes, answer these questions, and we'll be right back. Man, that last question is super tough, because the fact of the matter is that we all have a ton of things that keep us from following Christ. Now, I get it that we get distracted very easily, and that it's easy to go do a Bible study maybe on our phone or something like that. Next thing you know, we've scrolled through Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or whatever it might be for an hour or two, and we get distracted by what Jesus has called us to do. So there are, not saying your cell phone is bad, it can be used for a lot of good things, but that's just an example of some things that maybe get in the way of people. I know for me, that is one thing that gets in my way. And so I don't know what you have going on. I don't know what is in your way that is keeping you from being the disciple that God has called you to be, and that's keeping you from following him immediately. But my challenge for you is that you would identify that thing, and then also be able to put that aside so that you can be a better follower of Jesus, just like Levi did. This is an incredible example of what it means to follow Christ. Let's kind of move on to the next question. This is where you guys are going to be a little more interactive in this passage. I'm going to have you guys read a couple of verses for me. So I want you guys to read the rest of the passage, Luke chapter 5, verses 27 through 32. After you read that, here's what I want you to do. I want you to answer this question. What does Levi's reaction to being called by Jesus tell us about his heart change? So read this passage and let me know, what is it that changed Levi's heart from this piece of scripture? And then also, here's the second question. Can you compare the attitudes of Levi and the rich young ruler in Matthew chapter 19, verses 16 through 22? So we're going to have two people that are called by Jesus, but we're going to have two completely different perspectives and two completely different actions on what they do. So look at both of those scriptures. In the second one, tell me what the difference is between Levi and the rich young ruler, and we'll be back right here in a couple of minutes. All right, hopefully you guys were able to see that the rich young ruler responded in the completely opposite way that Jesus called him to. When he asked him to give over his possessions, he ran the other way. He said, absolutely not. I'm not willing to give up any of those possessions. So guys, the important thing we need to understand is this is a call and a cry, and it's so important that we immediately follow Jesus. Whenever he calls us to go, whatever he calls us to do, we are supposed to follow him. That is called being faithful. And I can tell you guys that God does in fact reward faithfulness. And so God will reward your faithfulness, but you need to do it because Jesus has called you to do it, just like Levi did. So that's so important. But now we can kind of transition and look at our main text from this whole series of Follow Me is when Jesus is seeking fishers of men. And he goes in Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 through 20, and he tells him, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. Follow me and I will help you to be disciples that can go out and can impact and can change the world. So here's the next question. I want you guys to flip over. A lot of scripture in this, but scripture is important. Flip over to Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 through 20, and I want you to read that. And I want you guys to understand that this is Jesus's invitation to discipleship, but also his lesson plan. All right? So as you read that, here's what I want you to do. I want you to identify the three objectives that Jesus wants to teach his disciples in verse number 19. So What are the three objectives in verse number 19 that Jesus is teaching his new disciples? The second question is this: the three qualities of biblical discipline from Matthew 4:19 is someone who follows Jesus, is being transformed by Jesus, and is fishing for men. Explain how a person is transformed by Jesus and then can fish for men. Because we can't fish for men until we have been transformed by Jesus. Explain why that's so. All right, guys, here is our last question of the night. Can you tell me what Levi lost materially when he left his job to follow Jesus? So what did Levi materially lose as he went to follow Jesus and left his job behind? Would you say that our culture today would say that that was worth it? Because remember this, tax collectors were very wealthy back in those days. So would our culture today say that that was worth it? And then would most Christians today say that it was worth it? And then finally, the last question of that question is, would you say that it was worth it for Levi to leave everything behind and to follow Jesus? Take a couple minutes, discuss it, and let me know what you think. All right, guys, so that is the conclusion of our second installment of the Follow Me series. Next week, we're going to close it out. It'll be our last week, so be sure that you guys come back next week, that you listen to what the scriptures have to say, and that we are doing everything we can to not only follow Jesus, but to go out and make fishers of men. I'll see you guys next week.